So last night, between 7:30 and 8, I think it was closer to 8, did you happen to find yourself in front of a window? Did you happen to be looking out the window when the clouds grew thick and dark and they cast this blanket of night over the countryside? Did you watch when the skies were split by lightning, and did you feel that thunder in your bones? If you were watching, if you saw it, try to imagine this. Some 3,000 years ago, you are an Israelite. You're one of God's chosen people. And here you are standing in this shiny, beautiful new temple that Solomon has just finished at great expense. Project of many years. You're standing there, and countless sheep and oxen have already been sacrificed, and the blood has flown freely to consecrate the altar. And now it's kind of the highlight of the ceremony. The Ark of the Covenant has been brought into its final resting place. The Ark of the Covenant has come to its final home, a permanent home, after generations in the tent of meeting. As you stand there, the Ark is reverently carried in and is placed in the inner sanctum, the most sacred part of the temple, where only a few priests are allowed to go. And you can see the carrying poles of the Ark from where you stand, and kind of try to stand a little bit taller and to lean a little closer to see if you can get a better look at it in there. And all of a sudden, all heaven breaks loose. All of a sudden, this cloud appears, not up in the sky, but right down there in front of you. And it's thick and it's dark enough to obscure the ark, to obscure the interior of the inner sanctum, and it even drives the priests out of that place, so they cannot stand there and minister the way they intend to. You stand there and you see this cloud. Cloud shouldn't be. Imagine the clouds you saw last night if they were close enough to touch. Imagine that being repeated right in front of you on a sunny day in Jerusalem, up in the pure air of the mountain. What would you think if you saw that? What would you do? How would it change you? Now, the $2 word for that kind of event is theophany. I think I've used it before. Theophany is the physical manifestation of the divine being. Typically, in the Old Testament, it's a manifestation that comes in the form of clouds and fire. Indeed, God was manifested a number of times, often in the Old Testament, in the story of Moses in the Exodus. We remember the burning bush that called out to Moses. That was a theophany. We remember the pillars of fire and smoke that led the people of Israel out of Egypt. Those were theophanies. As well as the cloud that enveloped Mount Sinai, or Mount Horeb, depending on who's telling the story. But the cloud that enveloped the mountain where Moses received the law. And whenever God manifested it throughout the Old Testament, it was always to make a point. It was always for a purpose. And on this day, there on the Temple Mount, the manifestation of Yahweh, the manifestation of the great I Am, was to tell the people that Solomon and Israel had done their work faithfully and well. That they had provided a landing pad worthy of God. It was to say, yes, that God would indeed be present there, at least sometime. And God's presence there that day encouraged Solomon in his prayer of dedication to ask that God would always keep an eye on the temple, that he would always keep an ear turned toward it so that he could hear prayers of his people that were spoken in that direction or on that place. In short, Solomon prayed that God would always be listening, that he would not abandon him. And the theophany was a sign of God's presence. But don't you imagine that no matter what kind of reassurance was meant by that, no matter how benign the presence of God was that day, the unmistakable, irrefutable presence of Yahweh in their midst must have been a little bit terrifying, maybe, for some of them. How many of us, knowing what we have done and how we have sinned, contemplating lives in which we maybe were not always perfect, how many of us would care? How many of us would really care or feel worthy to have God, the Creator, the all-powerful Lord of the universe, the Father? How many of us would really want to have him close enough to touch? Hanging there right in front of us. You know, we talk about God being everywhere, that God is present in the leaves and He's present in the grass and the sky. And the $2 word for that is being omnipresent. And we talk about God being omnipresent in this kind of blithe, ambiguous, hippy-dippy way. Oh, God is everywhere, man. He's in the trees and in the flowers and in the wind. How many of us really, truly comfortable with the idea that that God that we talk about is standing right in front of us? Or maybe standing behind us, watching. How many of us, confronted with the reality of God's presence, would be totally comfortable knowing that He was there, that He had been there and would be there, watching everything we do, aware of every thought we have and of every foible and failing that we might have? I think for at least some it must have been a terrifying sight, a terrifying moment, to know that God had come to the temple. We're told the Ark of the Covenant, which was a sacred object that was already known to be lethal to the careless. The Ark of the Covenant, if you look back on its history, there's at least one occasion when somebody died from touching it. The Ark of the Covenant at one time was stolen by another tribe, and not too long after they took it, they gave it back, saying it was too much trouble. So this great and powerful thing is brought in and it's put in the inner sanctum. And it's put there under the watchful eye of these ornately carved cherubim. In the Old Testament, cherubs were not the cute, angelic beings that we've turned them into in popular mythology, you know, the kind of pudgy, baby-like cherubs. Old Testament cherubs were terrifying creatures with wings and eyes all around, and they were the soldiers that were charged with guarding the garden after Adam and Eve were kicked out with flaming swords. And throughout the Old Testament, they are God's elite guards. So picture that. The cherubim carved there, you have the ark sitting under it. Once the ark is set down and the prayers start, this divine cloud manifests and it settles over the scene. For the people of Israel, their cultural memories kick in and it tells them exactly what's going on. Yahweh has come to call. And history tells them that Yahweh doesn't usually come by just to say, hey. How could they not be scared? And it's at this point that Solomon starts to pray the prayer of dedication. And we heard it today. It's a prayer that's both humble and respectful, and it reminds the people who are listening of God's greatness and glory. And it's also a supplication that reminds the people of the good news brought by the theophany, that yes, Yahweh is honest to goodness there. He can hear their prayers that are offered to Him from there, at this sacred space. And that would be comforting. It would be comforting to know that the God of your ancestors is really going to hear your prayers, but it must have been a little unnerving to know that He could just pop up anywhere. That He could just pop in and check on you. I don't know about you, but when I think of myself and things that I have done, when I actually consider that God is the divine reality of Santa Claus, He sees you when you're sleeping, He knows when you're awake, He knows if you've been bad or good, it gives me pause. Thinking about Solomon's prayer toward the end, I think about the times that I've looked into a stranger's face, a foreigner's face, and I have not seen the face of God reflected there, however dimly. And when I think of those things that I know for sure that I think of those things, I know that I could not bear to stand before God. I could not bear to stand in His presence. It was not for Jesus being at my side. I could not stand and face the God who created me and whom I have let down so often and in so many ways if I didn't know that Jesus was going to be standing there with me. That Jesus had come and bled and died for me, and if I didn't know that He had been resurrected and that He had triumphed over death, that even somebody like me might triumph over death one day. I could not stand there full of guilt and shame if I had not been saved by Jesus Christ. Watching the storm last night did something I don't usually do. I actually worked out in the living room instead of back in the office, so I had that picture window view of things as they developed. And watching that storm last night, I remembered another storm, another night back when I was about 10. It was a long time ago, back in the last century. And we were at the lodge at Point Beach where my parents ran the concession stand. And there had been a weather warning earlier that afternoon, and it was a pretty severe storm warning. So all of the campers had gone to safe places. All of the other visitors had left, and we were standing up in the back of the lodge under this roofed, kind of a roofed patio. We were looking out at the lake, and even though it was only late afternoon, summer, all around us was darkness. And the sky all the way out to the horizon was nothing but different shades of black and gray. It was clamped down over us like a dome. Way out there on the horizon was this circle of light, actually like a disk of light. And around it there were these two black streaks of cloud, and they looked for all the world like hands reaching around it. They were lifting it up out of the lake. And I looked at that 10 years old and I said, that's scary. Mom looked at it and she said, it looks like God is still holding on to the daylight. I remember that last night. And I remember it this morning because we are sinners. In our hearts, if we're honest, we know that we are sinners. We're victims. We're often willing victims of the darkness in this world, the dark places and the dark forces. But the good news today is that when we reach out to Jesus, If we give Jesus our hearts and we ask for forgiveness and we entrust our souls to Him, and there's still light within us. No matter what kind of clouds are hanging over us, no matter what storms are raging around us or even inside of us, God is still holding on to the light